So thank you all so much for joining the fifth in our series of webinars on Delivering 20. Particular thanks to Landor, who organised today's webinar, and of course to our 5 fantastic speakers. We hope you found it really useful. So we've had over 500 people registering for today's event. That brings the total across our 5 webinars to 2,000, more than 2,000 different people, including participants from 7 out of 10 UK highway authorities, illustrating yet again the importance of this subject. We've had more than 3,000 views of the videos of the previous events. They're all available on our website, 2020.org, or on Landor's YouTube channel. I'm Adrian Berendt, and I'm chairing today's event. My colleagues at 2020, Sue Nicholls, who is also one of our speakers today, Rod King, MBE, our chair and founder, and Louise Wass, who is helping to coordinate our local activities, are also on the call. Together with Jeremy Leach, who is not here today, we support hundreds of local campaigns and thousands of campaigners across the UK and abroad. Please contact us if we can help in any way. Details are on our website at 2020.org. So as chair, I have a few housekeeping matters. The webinar is being recorded, as you would have heard, and will be shared shortly after the event. It'll be on Landor Links YouTube channel and on the 2020 website, and we'll have links to it on our social media pages. Each speaker is going to present for about 10 to 15 minutes. Please submit your questions via the dedicated Q&A box, but if you could avoid putting chat in there, that helps us to make sure we see all the questions. With so many on the call today, it's going to be impossible for us to enable the chat function, though. We've had already over 100 questions submitted. If we don't get to yours, sorry, but if you want to email us, please do so at info@2020.org, and we'll try to answer them there. You're always welcome to attend our regular campaigner Zoom calls. Just register your details on our website. Once you log off, there'll be a short questionnaire. It'll just take a few minutes to fill that in. Please do that. Even if you have to leave early, it really helps us to plan future events that matter to you. So in earlier webinars in this series, we heard from practitioners in highway authorities about how they were implementing 20 miles an hour, particularly in rural areas, about the lessons for England from the 20 miles an hour default in Wales, about how 20 mile an hour with 30 mile exceptions lays the foundation for Vision Zero. And last time we discussed the importance of behaviour change. So today, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to recap some of those but particularly considering the backdrop of the government's road safety strategy published earlier this year, and in particular the commitment to reviewing the guidance on setting local speed limits. I hope you'll all by now be aware of the government's commitment to reducing road casualties by 65%, 2/3 by 2035, and perhaps even more importantly, to reducing road casualties for children by 70%. Looking through the registration feedback so far, there's clearly massive appetite for real, practical, real-world application rather than just theory. You've asked for concrete tools, real-life case studies, and strategies for implementation. So no pressure on our speakers then today. I'm hoping that they have tailored their remarks to focus heavily on things which are really actionable, and in particular, the contribution that 20 mile an hour can make to delivering those targets from the government. I've also asked them to comment on the current guidance on setting local speed limits, whether it's a hindrance or a help, and then what changes would make it cheaper and easier to implement 20 miles an hour. So as we've done previously, Sue's going to start us off, Sue Nicholls, with an update from Wales. We now have 2 years worth of data, and given the election results, the recent election results there, what changes might we expect from the new administration? We're going to hear from Andrew Gant and Adam O'Neill on how Oxfordshire and Cornwall are getting on with implementing 20 miles an hour. And then Darren Divall will talk a bit about the specific challenges that West Midlands faces in delivering the government's new road safety strategy. And I hope you'll give us a sneak preview of a very important Vision Zero conference, which is coming up on the 30th of June. That will segue into Phil Jones talking in a bit more detail about the role of guidance in setting local speed limits, on what the impact will be on the road safety strategy. And then at the end, we'll have a panel session which will answer your questions. So please, as I say, add your questions to the Q&A box, and some of them we'll try and answer live, others we'll do in the panel. So first up, Sue. Sue is a fellow director at 2020 for us, and she develops our fabulous graphics. Sue, I think you're going to update us with the latest from Wales and what the new administration might mean.
Yep. Get my screen up. Okay, yes, so I'm looking, oh, hang on, sorry. I'm giving, update on Wales' latest casualty figures, including a look at separated data from roads that reduced their limit from 30 to 20 after the default implementation, and also going to compare the latest figures from a look at the political change after the recent Senate elections and what that might mean for 20-mile-an-hour policy in Wales. So firstly, a reminder that 2020 have long been advocates of a default wide area approach to implementing 20-mile-an-hour limits. They offer a more inclusive, cost-effective way to reduce casualties and road danger in local communities. And a default approach brings with it a wide range of other benefits associated with lower speeds to cities, towns and village centres that simply aren't possible with a zonal approach, heavily reliant on engineering and typically only applied to a relatively small number of roads. So, and of course, there's a large body of evidence from places around the UK that have already implemented a wide area or default policy. Places like London, Edinburgh, Scottish borders, where we've evidence of significant reductions in casualties already. And of course, Wales, where we now have 2 years worth of data, as Adrian mentioned, following the implementation of the first national default urban 20 limit in the UK in 2023. So this chart shows the Wales road casualty data for the year preceding and 2 years following the default implementation. Overall casualties have reduced by 1,270, a drop of 26%, and this includes 14 fewer road deaths. This chart shows the 8 quarters worth of data for all 20 and 30 mile-an-hour roads, which clearly shows seasonal variation, as you might expect, but these average out to an overall 26% drop in casualties. So with the publication of the 2024 casualty figures for England, it's now much easier to compare figures for England and Wales. Although there was slightly more variation in casualties in Wales, they broadly tracked those in England until 2023, even including COVID. From the point at which the 20-mile-an-hour default was implemented in 2023, there's been a dramatic drop in casualty figures in Wales, whilst flatlining continues in England during the same period. So all the data that we have looked at so far has been combined before and after default casualty figures for all 20 and 30 mile-an-hour roads in Wales. These show, as I said, an overall casualty reduction of 26%. However, we now know that that some roads stayed with the same speed limit, stay with the same speed limit of 20 or 30, and they're included in these figures. So in this table, we're comparing the figures for those, and they're separated out into 2 columns with roads that changed after the default. The first column shows roads that either remained at 20 or 30 miles an hour, where we can assume that there were no changes in casualties as the risks remain the same. And the second column shows the remainder of roads that did change from 30 to 20, and this shows that casualties actually reduced by 37%. You could argue that there has been an ongoing reduction in casualties of around 5% in a year in Wales, naturally. But even if you make this deduction, the change would still be 32%, which shows the real impact of the default change in Wales, which is nearly 1 in 3 fewer casualties. It is worth reiterating that the main contributing factor in casualty reductions on this scale is, of course, lower driver speeds, which require people changing their behaviour. If drivers weren't being compliant and reducing their speed according to the new limits, we wouldn't be seeing such a significant level of casualty reduction in Wales. So by deciding to take their foot off the accelerator, they are given more time to think, brake and avoid a collision. And in the cases where a collision does occur, injuries are far less severe and for the most part survivable. So what do these reductions could mean for in England? And they have, the reductions we've seen in Wales have potential to similarly translate into reductions in England. And so the Department for Transport figures show that there were 58,106 casualties on 30-mile-an-hour roads in England in 2024. If a default limit of 20 miles an hour were to be implemented in England, we estimate that the casualties would reduce by 15,000, which is rather substantial. So, of course, there's another element to this, the recent elections, Senate elections in Wales, which has seen a really dramatic change in the governing of Wales, with the Labour Party, who were responsible for the rollout of the default, now having limited power and no power. With the national 20-mile default policy, it was pushed into the news as part of the pre-election debate by those campaigning to reverse the limit and the policy. In total, around 60% of people in Wales actually voted for parties supportive of the 20-mile-an-hour policy. The first of these parties, Plaid Cymru, who we know have gained enough seats to form a minority administration. They have been critical of the way the default scheme was rolled out, but they did back Labour's original 21 manifesto proposal and continue to support the policy. Obviously, there is continued support from the remaining nine Labour members and also from Welsh Liberal Democrats and New Green members. I think it is safe to say that there is not going to be a reversal of the default speed limit. Realistically, how could there be any justification for the reversal of a policy that would lead to significant increases in casualties, potential threat of legal action for deliberately choosing to put vulnerable road users at increased risk of harm, and in addition cost tens of millions of pounds? So to finish, 26% of fewer casualties in 2 years after implementation in Wales, mean speed reduction of 2.4 miles an hour. Insurance premiums in Wales are now £45 lower, and there's no substantial change to the 20-mile-an-hour default following the guidance review, with a total of around 1% of roads likely to increase to 30 miles an hour, and no cancelling of the policy following the Senate elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. So, in summary, 1,270 fewer casualties in the first 2 years.
Yes, amazing.
That's a lot of people not involved in a road collision, and 12 people walking around who wouldn't have been alive today.
Yeah.
And 60% of people in Wales voted for parties that support 20 miles an hour. That's interesting, quite similar to the sorts of level of support we see elsewhere. And yeah, there've been a few changes in specific places, but the new administration is clearly not going to roll back the 20 mile an hour default. Sounds very positive.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sue. So next we have Andrew Gant. Andrew, who originally presented in our first webinar, it was nearly 2 years ago now. Andrew, you've just stepped down from your position as Transport Lead for Oxfordshire County Council, but you were there for pretty much the entirety of the project, and I think you're going to tell us warts and all how it's gone. Andrew.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Adrian, and thanks to everybody for attending. It's so encouraging to see so much interest in this programme, and so great to have the support of 20 is Plenty, of Rod and Adrian and his colleagues. So yes, as Adrian said, when he first asked me to take part in this webinar, it was in my role as Cabinet Member for Transport Management at Oxfordshire County Council, a role which I held between May 2022 and last week, when after 4 years in the post, I decided it was time to let somebody else take the slings and arrows, of which there are some occasionally. So that is what happened. And as Adrian said, most of the 20 mile an hour implementation and design happened during that time. So as we'll see on the next slide, there were some key factors that were common to our effort. Bus company objections, which I understand is an issue that others have spoken about before. I've spent quite a lot of the last 4 years talking to colleagues in other authorities about common experiences and shared issues, and this is one that does come up. So what did the buses say? What did the bus companies say? We work with commercial bus operators, two principal companies in Oxfordshire, Go Ahead, which runs the Oxford Bus Company, and other subsidiaries, and Stagecoach. It's a very close working relationship. It's a very successful working relationship, but it is a partnership. It is absolutely a partnership. They are commercial companies whose driver is to deliver service which turns a profit. I do have colleagues who think that's a bad thing. I don't, because I think that we both have an interest in the same thing, which is good quality, reliable public transport, which people want to use. The main issue that they presented us with in terms of the 20 mile an hour scheme was that slower speeds make their services take longer, and therefore they wouldn't be able to run as many buses during the day, which makes them less profitable, which means they would have to reduce services. Of course, the default response to that from those in favour is, well, come on a minute, you're only talking about a few seconds here and there. That is true. However, what they then say is, yes, but if a bus is doing the same route round and round 10 or 15 times a day and is going through maybe 3 or 4 villages in which this has happened, which is perfectly true in a big rural county like Oxfordshire, those add up to potentially one fewer circuit of the route and reduced timetables, which nobody wants to see. So it's a question of testing out the evidence. Is what they're saying true? If as a politician, you then have to make a judgment and make a balance and make a call, and frankly, see what happens and be prepared to live with the consequences. And in the decision making, there is always going to be an element of negotiation and, frankly, to use a slightly dirty word, an element of compromise. And I'll give you one example of that, which is the beautiful market town of Abingdon. I remember very vividly the day before the decision meeting that I was chairing, where a fairly comprehensive scheme of speed limit reduction in Abingdon was coming forward. And I got a text from my senior officer saying, just checking you have seen the email from the Oxford Bus Company, haven't you? Which I hadn't. So I read it very early the next morning, and it said, basically, if you go ahead with this, we will significantly reduce bus services in Abingdon, and we will say that it was your fault. I didn't want that to happen. So we ended up having a pretty frantic discussion internally. And what we did was we deferred the proposal, which is a little bit of a political sleight of hand and a bit of political maneuvering. But what I said to my officers was, okay, guys, go away, sit down with the bus companies and come up with something which works. And they did. And we passed it, and it's now in place, and it works. And it involves elements of compromise about exactly where on a radial route coming from the town centre outwards, where does it stop being a residential area which justifies 20 and become a radial route where the speed limit can go up to 30. And that's what happened. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit more about politics and process. I've already referred to the use of deferral and timing can be your friend. The way we set up the scheme was to allocate a budget and then to invite local communities to apply. And there were some crucial safeguards in there. Firstly, in order to go ahead at all, any scheme had to have the active support of the local parish or town councillor and of the local county councillor. And that was absolutely vital, because it meant that then they couldn't turn around and oppose it later, although some tried to do that. The advantage of a large council doing that is that you have the economies of scale, dedicated officers, consistency of delivery, but by working closely with local representatives, you can then go into the local context in absolutely forensic detail, which is something that I must say I enjoyed, reading these reports and reading about absolutely local issues about a particular bend or a particular school entrance or something of that kind. And that was really important. Going on to the next slide, I've been often asked about the DFT guidance. I'll be perfectly honest with you. When I first started finding myself in the position of deciding these, I didn't even know there was any DFT guidance, because frankly, we didn't take any notice of it. I think the clue is in the word guidance. This was our policy. We decided we wanted to implement it. We offered it to communities to apply, and that's what we did. In front of you is a picture and a map of the little village of Tiddington on the main road between Oxford and Thame. And this is just an example of some of the choices that officers have to make. Running through there is a main road, a main A road, which passes some residential properties. And there was a big debate about whether it qualified for the 20-mile-an-hour treatment or not. And stretches of it did and stretches of it didn't. And, the local county councillor, who happens to be a colleague of mine now, in fact, the leader of the council, Tim Beerder, wasn't happy, actually, with what came up. But that was what officers recommended, and that's what we did. On to the next slide, we talk here about the police. Have the police been helpful? Not very, to be perfectly honest. They put in a statutory response to every single one of these schemes, which essentially boiled down to shrug of the shoulders, not our problem, mate. Don't expect us to enforce it. I'm not obviously expecting hard-pressed police officers to spend their time policing 20-mile-an-hour schemes in 300 villages in Oxfordshire, but frankly, it would have been helpful to have more visible written support for the principle that people are supposed to obey the law in the interest of keeping their communities safe. And I'm sorry to say that there was a little element of politics in there because of the politicisation of the role of Police and Crime Commissioner, which has been unfortunate. Important to stress that additional measures play a really important part in this. Our scheme was signs and lines only, which of course only has a limited effect in terms of enforcement, but it is of course always open to local communities to do more things, especially town and parish councils, which can put a little bit of funding towards things like VAS and SID signs, markings outside schools and that kind of thing. The next slide talks a little bit about the role of consultation, and there's a nice picture of me giving something a thumbs up. I'm not sure what it was. But if you just have a look at the agenda there that's sitting in front of me, I think that one was probably the one which gained the record. It was 2,600 pages of a decision meeting, which was the committee of one, namely me. Consultations are an very important part of the decision-making process. But I get very frustrated with politicians who say, oh, well, the consultation came out with a majority against, therefore you should reject the proposal. Because if you read consultation responses, that doesn't stack up. Some of the time, people don't answer the question that they've been asked. Very often people would say, I don't want this, I want you to fix potholes instead. Well, we do want to fix potholes as well, but that's got nothing to do with the speed limit. Some people, unfortunately, just resort to abuse. Some people question the overall validity of the policy. Some people say it doesn't help, it doesn't save lives. which is just incorrect. So my view is that it is incumbent on the decision maker to actually read and understand what people are saying and factor that in as appropriate. The next slide makes the point that this policy, like all transport policies, has to be seen in the context of policies as a whole. We have been very successful, I think, in Oxfordshire in the suite of policies which have introduced a large fleet of electric buses, school streets, which have reduced danger and inconvenience around schools very considerably, low traffic neighbourhoods, and many other achievements. The next slide makes a very brief reference to elements of national policy. This is an extract from the foreword to the ill-fated plan for drivers issued by the last Sunak government when they decided that there were votes in pandering to the car lobby. And I don't know if I take it as a badge of honour that Oxford was actually mentioned in the preamble to that document as an example of what they didn't like. And then coming towards the end, the next slide, how it's worked out. When we first set the budget for this programme, we essentially had to kind of guess, really. And back in the day when there was some money available to spend on things like this, we were able to put 8 million towards it as a 3-year programme. It's ended up costing basically just over half of that, 4.5 million, which is good. Nearly 300 communities, about 90% of all towns and villages in the county, have applied and had schemes implemented. And finally, on the very last slide of all, what are the conclusions? Well, it works. Almost all communities, as I say, took part. None of them have turned around and applied to have it taken out. Some have required monitoring and some tweaks and some changes put into them, which is absolutely right that it should be. The one major item that is outstanding is that the City of Oxford itself has not yet had a scheme for it, and that's because of other reasons, namely the ongoing closure of the Botley Road, which some of you may be familiar with. So that's it from me. Looking forward to taking any questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I particularly like your last comment there. It works, and I hope that people who are watching will find some really great detail in that presentation. I assume that your next job, then, if you left the transport as you left as transport portfolio holder, I assume you're going to be working on HS2, are you? If you can deliver a project at less than half the original budget. I think you said I think it works out about £5 a head or something in Oxfordshire. Maybe there's some lessons to be learned somewhere else. I also noted your comments about the consultation responses, and I think it's such an important point. They need to be read and understood, and not just weighed. In some places, they're just weighed, and if there's more of one than the other, that's what the decision is. And actually, it's the detail. It's the detail of the scheme which is really important, isn't it? And if you need to compromise in certain cases, well, by fine, do that. I was also very interested in that comment about the local bus companies. We hear that comment a lot, and it's great to hear that those concerns are largely unfounded. And of course, we're going to talk a bit more about the guidance on setting local speed limits. I'm fingers crossed the next iteration of that is going to be much more supportive. Like Andrew, Adam and Neil also presented on the plans for Cornwall in our first Delivering 20s webinar. Adam is Programme Development and Delivery Lead for 20 miles an hour in Cornwall County Council, and he's kindly called in from holiday. So that's beyond the call of duty, Adam. Please tell us how you go. Tell us how you're doing in Cornwall.
Thank you, Adrian. Hi, everybody. I'm Adam, and I look after the rollout down in Cornwall. Thank you for joining. On to our first slide, please. Our 20-mile starting point was a manifesto pledge of our previous administration. It was included within our refreshed local transport plan. Our better understanding and local support for 20's Plenty led to our initial trial in urban and rural communities. As officers, we were hopeful, but clearly apprehensive, as it was such a step away from our norm. Historically, a 20 mile hour would only have been delivered if alongside traffic calming. That's clearly unaffordable within council budgets when scaled county-wide. That initial trial became known as our phase 1 and has been considered a success to date. We had 76% and 85% positive consultation feedback received for our 2 initial areas. Based on that public feedback and the speed reductions recorded, our Cabinet approved our Cornwall-wide rollout in 2023. That was again supported at our Overview and Scrutiny Committee within our new administration last year. It's a signage-only delivery, supported through a comprehensive hearts and minds communications and engagement strategy. So we are not implementing traffic calming alongside our new 20s. The total cost will be just under 4.5 million and has been spread over several financial years. It's funded through our integrated transport block allocations, and we work in partnership with Vision Zero. Thank you. This is a graphic of our current 20s with completion due next year. You can see there are just a handful of gaps there remaining. The delivery order area to area was prioritised by collision data, as we consider that to be a fair approach. The black dots were our baseline, implemented prior to the rollout, so it totaled around 720 mile hours, carefully aligned with the 2011 Setting Local Speed Limits national guidance, so often accompanied with traffic calming. By being ambitious within that same guidance, we now have thousands of new 20s within Cornwall, so that's the rest of the coloured dots. We're still aligning with that 24 mile an hour requirement, but through our sign-only approach instead. So it's therefore become affordable within our funding, but we must be really careful with our speed limit extents. That 24 mile an hour requirement is limited, especially as we are seeing speeds reduce over time within our data. And just by comparing the number of dots, you can see it's been a significant and positive policy change for us. Our delivery process starts by driving every road before drafting the initial speed limit extents. We hold stakeholder meetings prior to full statutory public consultations. We're fully aware we're not going to get every initial extent correct, so we certainly welcome local knowledge to inform us. The consultation responses are reviewed, not weighed, before the consultation ends, and the speed limit extents are then finalised and communicated. Following implementation, all signs are checked prior to the sealing of the traffic regulation orders. We'll then collect collision and speed data, making minor adjustments wherever necessary. We do have enforcement within our 20s, but that's informed through our monitoring programme and also Community Speed Watch, which helps Devon and Cornwall Police on how best to target that enforcement. But we're clear enforcement is very much the last resort, though. We certainly can't be reliant on it, and so far, fortunately, we're not. And what I've tried to convey with this slide is that the process is genuinely thorough. Each stage takes considerable time, and we apply this same process from area to area as we sort of dot around Cornwall, ensuring we have that consistency. On to our communications and engagement strategy. To date, over 1.5 million accounts have been reached with a 20 mile an hour message. That includes those living and visiting the target areas. 20 mile an hour messages have been served on social media over 10.5 million times, and there have been over 21,000 clicks to find out more about our rollout. The message is targeted based on delivery stages as we progress through the programme. We have different messages depending on each delivery stage. So, for example, before, during, and after public consultations, we'll all have different messaging within those targeted areas. The graphic styling, as you can see on screen, will also be different. So it can vary between town, village, and coastal. So it's very much tailored for each community. And it's certainly a challenge to keep our programming in line with our comms engagement and our actual physical rollout of the signs itself. But our comms engagement certainly dovetails with our delivery. Here are a few examples of our wider engagements. Top left, bus stop graphics accompanied by messages on the real-time information, so the timetable screens, the electronic screens. Top right, we wrap the library van, community-based. Bottom left, A-frames with leaflet dispensers for engagement events. And bottom right, we provided vests for school walk-in buses, which were delivered alongside a school street for a primary school. And this is just a small snapshot of the wider work of our comms and engagement strategy. I generally haven't done it justice at all. There's a load more other resources all on our dedicated Cornwall 20 mile website. Our exceptions process, again aligning with setting local speed limits, encourages self-compliance. This example is a village also sitting on a strategic A road linking 2 of our towns. The top image was an existing 30 mph struggling for compliance and therefore too ambitious for a sign-only 20. It would certainly need additional help. We therefore decided to retain that existing 30 as a buffer limit leading into the new 20. The 20 mph itself, shown bottom right, covers a crossing, bus stops just hidden on the left-hand side, which provides access to the college. There's shops, post office, all etc., all within that village boundary itself. And our data is showing speeds have reduced within the 20 mph section as you'd expect, but we've also noted an improvement within that 30 mph buffer too, which was unexpected, but clearly a positive and something that we're going to keep an eye on. Apologies for showing Nuki with all the lovely beaches. We use this TomTom tool to support the program, and it's essentially a heat map of speed data from connected vehicles, which we use in a couple of ways. Through the delivery process, it helps refine our ambitious speed limit extents, still aligning with setting local speed limits. And it's also being used for our monitoring, having replaced a vast number of radar class or flashing speed advisor deployments. So it's a considerable saving on costs. So instead of having a single point on a single road for a week or 2 weeks, we've obviously got this area-wide view now where we can have a good look at it. We still use radar class deployments, but that's only where the TomTom sample size is too low, and that's literally just in a handful of sites. So in this example, you can just see the little segment I've clicked on in the middle of the screen there. And the box there is providing me with sample size, average 85th percentile speed, which is everything I need for monitoring and also that initial work as well. As you'll see on our next slides, and as I've mentioned, we're monitoring before and after speeds. That's for 4 years for each area delivered. So it's a rolling monitoring program, again, aligned with that delivery process. We've recorded consistent speed reductions across 90% of our sites delivered to date. And this includes a max 10 mph reduction at one of our locations, again, just by swapping signs over from a 30 to a 20 when delivered alongside that comms and engagement work. And that's obviously a target we're always trying to beat. Early analysis of collision data is showing a positive downward trend. So comparing data from that baseline period, what we currently have, it shows an 8% reduction in collisions and a 50% reduction in casualties in Falmouth and Penryn, which was our urban area from our initial trial area, and a 46% reduction in collisions and 26% reduction in casualties in Camelford, which is, again, through our phase 1, but that is our rural area. So you can really see the difference between the two. A caveat I do need to mention is the analysis remains subject to change, so it's only valid at this time. We'll certainly continue to monitor. And whilst we can't attribute this positive downward trend solely to the 20 mile program, we have reviewed the data and analysed it at length. It does provide a good impact that the 20 mile program is actually having. So again, really positive. To ensure our before and after figures are fairly comparable, 30s and 20s were combined when reviewing the collision and casualty data. Naturally, the number of 30s will reduce and the number of 20s will increase, so combining the two data sets seemed the most sensible approach to us. Our rollout started in earnest in 2023, and you can see the reductions in both collisions and casualties from that point onwards. And we would certainly expect that to continue as we progress towards completion next year. And just to explain those 2020 figures, as they seem a quite nice little dip, they're obviously impacted by the COVID restrictions. And to conclude, a targeted sign-only approach is both proportionate and impactful. Local knowledge helps to inform where best to locate 20s, and we've maintained strong public support throughout. Thousands of new 20s have been implemented within Cornwall, while still adhering to that national setting local speed limits guidance. The TomTom tool is aiding our delivery and has improved our monitoring capability. It's also significantly reduced our monitoring costs. Our comprehensive communications and engagement strategy is achieving a good reach and helping to reassure communities of the benefits. And it is possible to implement thousands of new 20s, but a sign-only approach does have limitations beyond that to stay within that national guidance. So that's where updating the guidance would certainly help, particularly within the more rural areas where our collision data is demonstrating greater benefits. And we would like to extend it further. That's clear at our stakeholder meetings too, but we are also seeing wider speed reductions as well. And a final positive note to end on, speed and recorded injury collisions have reduced, and we'll continue to monitor closely. Thank you very much. More than happy to help through any separate calls the way I can. Instead of trying to scribble down that link, Cornwall 20 mile hour, Google it, it will pop up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adam. I think for anybody who wants to implement 20 miles an hour, just follow your presentation. That's so comprehensive, and it's really good. I mean, you presented to us almost a couple of years ago now, and you were sort of about halfway through then, or maybe a third of the way through. Really great to see the progress you're making. And I was down in Cornwall just over a year ago, and I can say, the difference is palpable. I walked. I was doing some walking, and we were walking on roads. I think in a place called Sheffield, which is not in Sheffield, but in Cornwall, without roads, without villages, without pavements. And actually it felt pretty safe. So I think what I really liked about your presentation, I mean, there's loads there. So I encourage everybody to look at the video again and recap it. But I was really interested in the high approval ratings. I was also rather like Andrew. The authorities have clearly gone through a learning process, which is really interesting. The importance of listening to communities, and your PR material is excellent. I would urge anybody to take your logo off and put their own on. And I think interesting, you've managed to cover a lot of places despite the guidance. So yeah, and obviously, you could have done a bit more if the guidance had been better. So thanks very much, Adam. That's been really helpful. So now we come to we're going to go up country a bit more. We come to the regional road safety manager, transport for West Midlands, Darren Divall, who's going to introduce the government's road safety strategy target, which is a 65% reduction in road casualties. And I think you're going to talk a bit about how the West Midlands is making progress towards meeting those targets, or is planning to make the progress.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Thank you. Yeah, you can see here we've got a nice, lovely picture of Birmingham and the car-free in that particular area, despite the fact that Birmingham is now actually statistically the most car-dependent city in Europe. So presents its own challenges for sure. Yes, of course, on the 7th of January, we had the launch of the National Road Safety Strategy. Very pleasing to see, something that we'd been asking as an industry for some time, with targets, and we've got them. And now, obviously, alongside government, we have to then now aim to deliver them. So there's a lot of pressure on everybody. What I'm pleased about is our own regional road safety strategy and action plan for the West Midlands Combined Authority regions, which has 7 local authority areas, is very much aligned to what's in the National Road Safety Strategy, thankfully, otherwise we'd have had to change that a lot. The policies surrounding this particular topic, for example, within Birmingham, they are committed to enhancing what they've already got in terms of 20 mile an hour speed limits in the area, and there's a debate that's nicely popping along with the 6 local authorities as well, and how it all fits in with the national approach as well as the regional approach. And what I'm really pleased about with the national strategy is that those themes on the right hand side, when we're talking 20 mile an hour speed limits, it fits into every single one of those, all 4 of those approaches. So that's pretty positive from my angle. And we know that we're expecting new guidance later in this year or next year, following on from the launch of the strategy. Those are already in sort of development as it sits at the moment, but I'm sure there'll be lots of governance that sits behind it before it comes out. But just to reinforce what others have said today already, these are guidance documents, okay? So they're guidance on what is believed from a national perspective to be the right approach going forward. It does not mean that it must be used in every single area. It is guidance for highway authorities to use to push forward their transport plans, and giving almost like providing almost like an aid memoir or a set of principles in which we should be using to improve road safety. I highlighted there, sorry, I should just go back to that, highlighted obviously the one that's coming through from best practice guidance on setting local speed limits, which is going to be updated, and then updated manual for streets as well, which will have that element of 20 miles an hour in there. What's key with all of these is that evidence, data and evidence is vital. We need to understand what's required, where it's required. And this is a quick word cloud from the National Road Safety Strategy, taking the top 50 words, taking out those basic words of roads, safety and government, etc. And then looking at the rest of the words in that document, the actual context of it, what comes out more than anything else is data and evidence. So again, really, really positive that current guidance, and we hope future guidance, will come along and talk about the necessity for an evidence base that supports intervention. The current guidance on setting speed limits, it's obviously a 2013 circular that was revised in March 2024, which isn't too far back. And again, yes, really pleasing evidence led. There is a lot about compliance in that document, in terms of the different ways that you could see that. So you could have self-explaining environment. So that's a safe system approach to that, which is where we're going already as well. The reinforcing of speed limits, and how do you reinforce that? Is it through education? Is it through enforcement? And then encouraging compliance. So thinking about those behavior change elements and the education that we need to give people, but keeping speed limits under review. And that's really interesting for me, because actually what we're saying here is we want more 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. I doubt we're going to review them so much that we then say, actually, now we need 10-mile-an-hour speed limits at this particular point, but who knows? But we'll see how it goes. And the current urban speed limit guidance reinforces that, really. It's about understanding those 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, but transferring to those over time, which is valuable in the consideration of what Scotland have done and what Wales have done, for example, and others are doing in terms of a blanket policy for 20-mile speed limits in certain areas and roads. So we have to consider that, because actually I think there's a real raft of evidence now, internationally and through lots of organisations in the UK, that 20-mile-an-hour speed limits are really, really important. They're really valuable. They play a very, very important role in reducing road harm, and that's what we're all essentially aiming for. But the urban speed limit guidance, which is contained within the setting speed limits document and circular, is about that consideration of the safety case, but making sure that we are getting that support from all stakeholders before implementing something, which I know that there's been quite a lot of consultation on this particular approach. So what do we need in this updated one? The first thing that I would always say is that in the new highway code, you've got the graphic on the right-hand side here, which talks about that hierarchy of road users and making sure that everything we do in terms of road safety, from a road safety perspective, as well as supporting the active travel policy and other transport policies, active travel and other transport policies as well, is to focus on ensuring less harm for those who are most at risk. And you can see that that is very well presented in the highway code, and also that we need to really fully understand what the pedestrian, cyclists, horse riders, the level of risk exposure to those road users from motor vehicles. Not that we want this at all in any way, shape or form to be seen as a war on motorists for speed limit. But we do think that when I say we, regional, but also I also chair the Urban Transport Group Road Safety Working Party as well, so getting information from members of that. But we think that the government really needs to seek guidance from the industry, seek guidance on the evidence, whether it be local, because the strategy is requiring local delivery. DFT see themselves as the policymakers, but they want local delivery. So they must start to listen to us and think about what it is that we feel is feasible and what is required for this. Speed limits are there to protect those road users most at risk, is what I've already mentioned. Consideration of people and place. So the people in the place, who lives there, who visits there, who works there, what's the traffic mix, how do we build safe and attractive locations where children can play, where people within the communities can engage and socialize and not feel segregated. That's why we need lower speed limits as well, and we need that to be represented in the new updated guidance very clearly. But there does still need to be a bit of pragmatism. If your economy, of which the one in the West Midlands is very much is Birmingham as well, if the economy is very much supported by the transport of freight, for example, and goods, we need to understand where we separate that thought process and be a bit more pragmatic about, okay, so higher speed limits might be more appropriate at this location as opposed to the ones that we're putting the 20-mile-an-hour limits in. So that bit of pragmatism there will be important. And educating changing behaviour. You can't do that unless you take everybody on that journey with you. It's okay having a political statement or a transport policy within a highways authority. You've got to take everybody with you, and if they're not with you, that's where we will see confusion, a lower level of compliance, and a different approach and attitude towards safer roads. So we need that to be represented in the new updated guidance. Reinforcing responsibilities, roles, responsibilities, and that's from your councillors and your senior directors and managers, right down to your fleet operators, right down to ordinary road users, to communities, to groups, to the partnership of delivering all of this. Who's got the roles and responsibilities there? So a bit of a race in that sense. Priority junctions, we know that 20% of vulnerable road user KSIs are at junctions, so that's really going to be important to us, considering where the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits start and end. The infrastructure, there is research out there that states that just a speed limit sign and a change of speed limit and the TRO that comes along with that is as effective as a 20-mile-an-hour zone, where you might have traffic calming. But I think every location, the place and people element, requires more consideration about that going forward as to, is the infrastructure required? Is it not required? Why is it not? How wide are we doing this? Because actually you can see more benefits when you are putting in a wider 20-mile-an-hour scheme over a community or communities, rather than just on an individual route here and an individual route there. So more to consider in that. That pragmatism is definitely within this hierarchy of road users, and lower speed limits where those are most at risk, where they are present. So keeping that in there. So there's a lot of things that we want to be able to push forward with government to ensure that that new guidance comes through. So a couple of examples here: education and behaviour change. You've got the Road Safety Scotland image here, and that for me is really important. It's not just about saying 20 mile an hour, it's about giving that statistics, trying to get understanding that, you know, if someone is hit at 30, they're 7 times more likely than at 20 miles an hour. You know, it's trying to get people to understand why we are lowering speed limits. The Welsh one obviously was leading up to the implementation from 30 to 20, but again, trying to just give that piece in there. And we know that enforcement changes behaviour. It's a behaviour change intervention, should I say, rather than anything else. And we need to consider whether it's appropriate and where it's appropriate in that. I need to move on because I know the time, so apologies if I'm going relatively quick. A couple of slides left. This one here is the warning, if you like. Beware. So I know that Councillor Charlton has to question early on in this about that political landscape and the challenge that this presents to us all in terms of how we go forward. In Wales, this was related to Wales. There was a campaign by another political party that talked about stop Labour's 20 mile an hour speed limits. There wasn't that support. We've just had these local elections, and in the West Midlands, we now have 176 reform councillors that we never had before. We have 4 local authorities that are now no overall control, whereas they had control before. These political mixes will impact, but lower speeds protect communities and people, and they should not be used as a political tool. Technology, we all know about intelligent speed assistance, I hope, and what that could potentially present. The difficulty is it's not mandatory. We can have it turned off if we want to. We can press a button and it's gone. So we really need to think about whether that comes through. And the final slide is about the political support for local delivery. So a practical support even. We need to understand what is expected, not necessarily just guidance. Sometimes it's nice to be descriptive and directive about what we think is really good based on the evidence. But whether you're delivering kid streets or it's 20s plenty for us, that's the theme, and then the update to the manual for streets as well. We need to make sure that these are all part of that systematic approach to improving road safety, and part of that is lower speeds for all road users. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Darren. That's really good. I mean, there's lots of things which are similar to what Adam and Andrew are talking about, but clearly there's a West Midlands context there. I mean, I particularly like how you're linking the targets with the vulnerability of different road users. But how 20 miles an hour seem to underlie all of that. I also liked your point, which I think you made, about how actually we all travel in different ways at different points. Whether it's on a bus or whether it's walking or whether it's driving in a car. So actually, we're the same people, and actually, it doesn't matter how we vote. If we get hit by a car, they're not going to. The driver's not going to say, "Oh, that's somebody who voted for Plaid Cymru or somebody who voted Liberal Democrat. I'll crash into them." It doesn't matter, does it? It's we find actually to be fair. There are some people who there's some parties who are not so keen on 20 miles an hour as other parties, but there are always councillors in every party who are supportive. That's what we find throughout the country. You said about this question about, oh yes, well, will it be 10 miles an hour next? Well, I don't think so, because actually the sweet spot around risk reduction is actually just slightly less than 20. It's about 18 miles an hour, I understand. But that's so if you were to reduce the speed limit to 10 miles an hour, which we're not recommending, you wouldn't gain much in reducing the risk. So that's why 20 miles an hour seems to be the right speed. We can get into a bit more about the specifics in West Midlands in the panel discussion maybe. So last but definitely not least, we've got Phil Jones, who well known to many people here, the founder and chair of PGA Limited. So Phil, how are we going to translate those really big strategic targets in the government road safety strategy into action, and what's the role of setting local speed limits?
Thank you. Thanks, Adrian. So as Adrian said, I've been asked to look at what the new 20 mile an hour policy should look like for England. As Darren said, we've been promised new speed limit guidance. But first, I'll give my views on the current guidance on 20 miles an hour and why, in my view, authorities shouldn't follow it slavishly. Then I'll look at where guidance and policy is at in Wales and Scotland. And then I'll finish with some thoughts about the new guidance that's on its way for England. But first, the current speed limit guidance. So Circular 1 2013 or 113, as the name suggests, it was originally written 13 years ago now, before an awful lot of 20 miles an hour was done. But it was revised in March 2024 under the Plan for Drivers. And in my view, it's pretty clear that was a politically motivated set of changes. And I think, it was really designed to make 20 miles an hour more difficult if authorities followed. But interestingly, it did confirm, as we know, that it's not binding on local authorities, as Andrew said. I've heard some authorities say, despite that they have to follow Circular 113, and I've even heard some officers saying they might be held liable if they don't follow the guidance and there are casualties, neither of which I believe to be true. But there we are. So that's where we are. And we could, if you forensically, and I have done, go through the changes, you can see there were a lot of deletions and additions. the words traffic authorities should consider the introduction of more 20 mile an hour limits. That was deleted. And words like only introduce in the right places with local support, and then ensure any such measures are targeted and not introduced as a blanket measure. Really, I think pushing back against the approach of some authorities like Oxfordshire, like Cornwall, perhaps in the light of what had happened in Wales and the pushback that was happening at the time there, because obviously this change was made following the rollout in Wales. And it also removes some quite important positive statements about the benefits of 20 mile an hour speed limits that were known in 2013, and those were just removed. And it introduced changes, these words are my emphasis, overuse risks undermining public acceptance, leads to longer journey times, increased air pollution and climate impacts, and damage local businesses. And those statements are repeated several times. There's no real evidence for those statements. And what he didn't do was refer to the more recent evidence of the clear safety benefits that we've seen in London, Scottish Borders, Wales, Oxfordshire, other places. So that's in my view. Now, I'd just like to touch on the compliance thing. Many people get quite hung up on compliance, and Cllr 113 does emphasise that compliance is really, really important. Of course, it should be an aim. We want people to drive at the speed limit. It's there for a reason. But I think that there's perhaps some thought that it is rather overestimated and the importance of it. And what that results is in the 24 miles per hour problem. So what the guidance says, and this is not new, this was in the original Cllr 113, if the mean speed is already at or below 24, then a 20 mile an hour speed limit with no traffic calming will lead to general compliance. So then he goes on to say they should be considered where the mean speeds are at or below 24. So what that means is that if you follow this guidance to the letter, then the most important determinant of whether you have a 20 miles an hour speed limit is the existing speed of traffic. So above 24 miles per hour, they are potentially seen as inappropriate without traffic calming, which is expensive and maybe unpopular. But then there becomes a kind of catch-22, because if speeds are already an average of, say, 22, then the charge can be levied. Well, what's the point of the 20 mile an hour speed limit? And I think in Oxfordshire, and Andrew can probably speak about this, that was called a perverse outcome, which I think is sensible. So, just kind of graphically, here we have a non-compliant driver driving at 25 in a 20, they might get a ticket, and then we have a compliant driver at 29. And of course, one might be considered to be acceptable and one might be unacceptable. But we know that the first, which is the non-compliant outcome, will have something like a 25% fewer casualties based on that relationship of around 6% reduction in casualties per 1 miles per hour reduction in speed. So the process by which authorities that follow Cllr 113 to the letter, we identify the need for a potential 20 limit, we measure the speed, and then if the speeds are over 24, then we have to put in traffic calming, and then we have to go out and achieve support for that. But we know that the presence of traffic calming, as I say, will make it more difficult to achieve that support, and will make the scheme much more expensive. But if we succeed, then we make a 20 miles an hour order. But in more pro 20 miles per hour authorities, and certainly Oxfordshire and Wales and perhaps Cornwall, Adam may comment on that, it's really identify the need for the limit, achieve that support, which would be much easier, then make the 20 miles an hour, then monitor the speed, and then only introduce that traffic calming where it's necessary, where speeds remain too high. Or you might actually change the boundary between the 30 and the 20, has been done in some cases. And so it's doing the cost-effective thing first. That's more likely to gain public support. But because of that kind of dichotomy, this is as of 2024, this is a map of speed limits across England and Wales, central part of England and Wales, and 20 limits are shown in the sort of pink colour. We can see that there are authorities, obviously Wales stands out, but there are authorities that do follow it extensively, London, Bristol, much of the northwest, but large parts of England don't, or to a very limited degree, and that results in a real patchwork. And I think that's the problem for me of Circular 113, is that some authorities are following it and resulting in very few 20s, and others are giving it a much kind of lighter touch or ignoring it completely. So let me just move on very quickly to Wales. What did Wales do? Pre-rollout, they published exceptions guidance. So the idea was that any road with street lighting was automatically 30, but there could be exceptions to that. That was the word that was used. But the principles in that guidance were drawn from this document, the Stockholm Declaration, which sets this idea that where vulnerable road users and vehicles are mixing, then 30 kilometres or around 20 miles an hour is the right speed. And existing traffic speeds and the presence of bus routes were not factors that authorities should take into account. So really removing the 24 mile per hour barrier that still remains in England. In the revised exceptions guidance, which there were some tweaks to that post rollout, it kept pretty much the same principles, that 20 miles an hour where people mix, place criteria to help people kind of look at that, authorities look at that, but then said for main roads you can set 30 provided it's safe. And then how do you assess that safety? Well, it's segregated facilities. Are cyclists protected? Are there regular crossings? Are there pavements? Is the geometry safe? And so the core principles remain the same. And as Sue said, we haven't seen an awful lot of change that has happened. In Scotland, they published an implementation guide in 2024. They were originally considering a Wales legal default approach, but now effectively 20 miles per hour is a policy default for urban areas in Scotland, and they're being rolled out town by town, city by city. But really very little difference in substance between Wales and Scotland. That presumption in favour of 20, considering the road function, the demands for walking and cycling, its importance in the network, and the characteristics of whether people are mixing with motor traffic. And then just finally so we've got new speed limit guidance coming in England. As Darren said, we've got the road safety strategy happening, and that 65% reduction in the number of KSIs by 2035, a new set in local speed limits. And we unpacked the Parliamentary Advisory Committee on Transport Safety, engaging with the devolved administrations and local authorities on what this revised guidance is going to look like. So that's really, really good news. It's on its way. And just my thoughts, there's a really interesting report. We'll put these links in the chat, hopefully. The Road Safety Foundation have published a really interesting report just analysing the different types of collisions that happen and how they might be related to the characteristics of the road. And so really the view is that this speed limit should depend on the function of the street, its characteristics and the physical tolerance of the users, rather than what drivers are currently perceiving the right speed to be. So what types of movement, what is the level of that place activity, are people mixing, and the detail, are there 90-degree junctions, as Darren mentioned, a source of many casualties and collisions. And then for faster roads, is there a central barrier, because head-on collisions are a real problem. And we need to also look at the process. So what's the right limit? Do we monitor it and then do intervene? But my final thought on that is that is going to take potentially quite a long time to produce that, because this is guidance for all roads, not just urban ones. So I think in the short term, I think government could do a lot by perhaps writing to every local authority and just making it clear that the 24 miles per hour perceived barrier to 20 miles per hour speed limits, in the light of experience in many places, should no longer be seen as such an important consideration. I think that would take us a long way forward. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. While we're just waiting for panelists to put their cameras on for the panel discussion, is there also something around highway authorities implementing speed limits rather than zones, do you think? If the guidance were changed to say, look, you can put zones in if you like, but actually limits are better.
Well, in Wales, one of the changes that was made in legislation in Wales was to remove zones. So you can no longer do a 20-mile-per-hour zone in Wales. I mean, I think they're a bit of a legacy. The idea of a special zone around a school or and that it requires traffic calming, I think is quite an outdated concept. And what it leads to in places, I mean, I've seen this in Birmingham, you get a sign saying 20-mile-an-hour zone ends, and in fact a 20 limit starts, which is completely confusing. So when you pass a sign saying 20 zone ends, you think the speed limit is 30, but actually you might still be in a 20 limit. So it's incredibly confusing. So I think they've personally, I think they've had their day. I think we should remove them and just, as in Wales, go for 20 limits like any other speed limit.
And that of course reduces the cost of implementation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because actually there is no legislative requirement for any traffic calming or any reminders, actually, even. I mean, clearly you want to put some in, so it makes it much cheaper, doesn't it?
It does.
So thank you.
Also quicker as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, indeed. So look, we've had loads of questions. I can see that a lot have been answered live. So thank you very much to colleagues who have been doing that, busily tapping away while we've been guessing here. A lot of the questions were around sort of evidence, data, and real world impact. I think we've had lots of that. The speakers have answered those questions during their presentations or in the chat. We also had a lot of questions around sort of institutional and what I term institutional and council friction. And it seems that there's sort of a pain point for attendees is how do you navigate resistance from the local authorities, in particular the highways departments, and who are using sort of standard, maybe outdated engineering metrics. So the question I've got, I suppose, summarising all that, is how can campaigners effectively challenge institutional pushback and outdated traffic metrics? Sue, do you want to go ahead for that? Because I think you've already had some examples for that.
Yeah, but perhaps not on the metrics, but like a more general campaigning.
Yeah, sure.
Tactics.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you recently had a win in Buntingford, haven't you?
Yes. It's been a very long journey, and I'd say the first tip is be persistent and be prepared to be in it for the long haul. And it's taken me 6 years to get agreement for a whole town limit in Buntingford rather than a very small zone. I think the thing is, if your political positioning is the key to implementation, and for 3 years while I've been campaigning, we had a Conservative administration that were very hostile to 2020 and were very slow in their implementation of their proposals, even though they were messaging that they were on board. So the thing is, if you get the kickback, is to really remain active and keep sharing good news from elsewhere and that data that shows that the casualty reductions. And I'm very keen on the social justice element of this as well. So keep pushing the community, environmental and health benefits of wide area schemes because they're crucial to local community, and feed that into the debate wherever possible. I think start conversations locally, challenge that misinformation, and then eventually political change does happen. That happened here last year where the Liberal Dems have got control over the county council. I mean, I've taken it to extremes, haven't I? I've become a member of the national team because I was not getting anywhere locally. And I also got myself elected as a district councillor to push the agenda. And even though we don't have highway authority, we're not able to implement schemes, you're in those discussions and in the room with the decision makers from every level, from local, parish and town council meetings. You're there with that representative. You can get locals to show support and push the agenda from the bottom and then top down. And that's really worked. And being that two different prongs of attack, a political attack and a local campaigning attack. that's meant that I was able to push for a whole town local speed limit where it was not even on the agenda before, and now we've got a positive administration. They quickly adopted that as their preferred option, got 60% local approval for it, and that looks like we're going to get it.
Fantastic. So, that's really good news. Darren, can I turn to you? So on the politics, or maybe. So we know that Birmingham committed to 20 miles an hour a long time ago, and it's even asked, I think twice now, it's asked the government for dispensation to make 20 miles the default speed limit in the city. Yet there's not really a lot of progress, is there? Or is there?
Well, I think behind the scenes, there's a push for progress for sure. I mean, their new road harm reduction strategy is obviously part of that policy approach and what they want to deliver. And they have and are investing heavily in improving road safety. And this will be part of that system that they're trying to do. I don't think the 20 mile an hour rollout has necessarily been as quick as they would like. So I think, that they'll own up to that themselves. But I think part of that is, and I think we alluded to it a minute ago with Phil, about the cost of, under the new guidance, the cost of implementing 20 mile an hour. And that request to government is a real positive thing, because it's saying to government, we want to do this. We want to support your strategy delivery. We want to support our own strategy delivery, but it's too expensive to do it your way. So therefore, can you allow us to do a default one? And that process will obviously be discussed. The difficulty is now that they've gone from one party having responsibility and the power or the control of the local authority area. Now it's no overall control in the new system. We've now got to wait for a new administration to come into place. And once that's in there, the cabinet member will be appointed, and then the officers have to negotiate with the cabinet member what their views are. So the view may be different. Will it be, let's go for blanket? Will it be a bit of a slower approach? Will it be a bit more targeted and area based and things like that? We don't really know that yet. So there will be a number of factors that are affecting the speed of getting that in place. But what I can confirm is that the council has a policy for implementing 20 mile an hour limits, and it stays in place, and that will stay in place alongside the strategy. The last thing just to say on that, Adrian, is that Wales were for this and were very for this, and in the Senedd, this was discussed, first of all, in May 2019. Full implementation, what we got was September 2023, 4.5 years with a very, very supportive government body wanting to deliver something. I'm not saying we're not supportive here, but it takes time as well.
I think that's the message which I have to give to all campaigners is it takes time. It'll happen, but it takes time. So do persist. Of course, it's actually not a blanket anywhere, is it, Darren? Because there's always exceptions. The only blanket we've got actually is the 30 mile an hour limit. Which is that's the blanket for every as a standard default. So even in Birmingham, I don't think the Aston Expressway is going to go 20 miles an hour anytime soon.
I doubt it. That's where the pragmatism comes in, which I mentioned earlier on. Yes, you're correct.
Exactly, and that's what I heard from Phil and from Sue and from Adam and Andrew. The need for compromise and just look at the detail. Andrew, I just wanted to ask you a bit about this the political commitment.
Yeah,
I mean, how do you build the strategy for sort of getting local support? How do you build the political courage?
Yeah.
And getting local councillors to back the 20 mile an hour limit?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd be very interested in the comments of the last two speakers there. Very interested to hear from Darren how much notice officers take of the views of a cabinet member. That's a nice, welcome insight. Look, I mean, everywhere is different. Oxford and Oxfordshire has its own particular character, as all places do. And I'm very, very well aware that we are extremely lucky here in Oxfordshire. Oxford is a particular character of place. obviously you'll understand that the population, because of the nature of the town, has a lot of people who do understand and value active travel and things of that kind, as well as having a constrained medieval street scene, which simply cannot cope with modern levels of traffic. It can't. Everybody recognises that, and everybody's agreed that we have to do something, even if we have disagreements about what to do. We have a really robust support group of voluntary groups, stakeholder groups out there, and that is absolutely key. And what I'd say to Sue, congratulations on getting elected as a district councillor there. But you then said, but of course we're not the Transport Authority. Don't underestimate how helpful it is to the Transport Authority to have people like you standing up and saying, come on, we want you to do this. I represent my community. This is what I want, because that gives you cover, frankly, and that is so helpful. It really is. So I would just agree with what other people have said. Understand why you want to do what you do. And frankly, politically, it's not a hard sell. Do you want your children to be safer? Do you want fewer casualties in your community? Is anybody going to actually say no to that? I remember in one debate in the council when politicians in another party were trying to sort of catch us out, as they do. That's their job, fair enough. And the leader of the opposition stood up and said, can the cabinet member please tell me how many casualties have been avoided as a result of the 20-mile-an-hour scheme, which of course you can't. And one of my colleagues turned to me and said, ask him how many he thinks would be acceptable. And there's your answer, So know why you want to do it, keep on saying it, be prepared to take the long view and stick with it. Perhaps the most frustrating thing of all in politics is politicians who set out with good intentions but don't have the political maturity to stick with it and see it through, and get knocked off course by noises coming from their electorate, frankly, because you end up with nothing and it doesn't work, and it doesn't actually help them get re-elected because people don't believe what they say.
And I think that's what we've seen. That's what we've seen in Wales, where the 60% people voted for candidates who actually supported 20 miles an hour.
Yeah, same here, same in Oxfordshire.
Just on that, Adrian, I remember watching a question time discussion when the Senate elections are on, and Reform kind of did make their statement that they would move away from it, and the audience was very clearly anti that, and so with all the other panelists. And I think it's pretty clear that has now become a minority view in Wales.
I've seen the same thing on Facebook, and I think on LinkedIn, where certain political parties have put up saying we're going to reverse this, and there's an overwhelming pile-on say no, you better leave it like it is because it's working. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting. People will all clearly, if you propose it, whenever you propose something, I think Andrew probably gets this. Whenever you propose something, a lot of people say, a lot of people who don't want it will shout out. The people who do want it, they're going to be quiet. So I think it's really important. Adam, can I ask you, in Cornwall, you had the situation where the incoming administration already had a mandate to do this. Where were the officers? Were the officers ahead of the game, or were they? Did you have to sort of catch up?
No, we were behind. So it was almost like we had an Andrew, for example, pushing it onto us. And personally, I was quite apprehensive because it was very much setting local speed limits is all I've really known since sort of doing A and B speed limit review in 2011. We did the trial, and all that sort of apprehension disappears, and that's the same for bus operators or Devon Cornwall Police. It's all that sort of misperceptions of it. Once we got the trial out of the way, had the data there, all completely fine.
That's really interesting, and that's what we see a lot actually. We see lots of concerns ahead of a change, and I think we talked a bit about this in the last webinar. The hill of hysteria, or whatever it was. That all its real concern just before a change, and then afterwards the objections seem to fall away. Darren, you said earlier that you need to bring all of the people with you. I don't think you're ever going to get all the people. What's a sort of, how many do you need? 40%, 50%, 60%?
I think we'd like to have more than that. Actually, if you look at
Okay.
seatbelt legislation, I know we don't refer back to the click every trip on the seatbelt legislation. That campaign allowed the government to get to 80% sort of agreement and support before they introduced the legislation. And we've just had a survey regionally as well about safe streets and about pavement parking and other road safety interventions. And we are seeing a level of about 73% of all the different interventions of support from our communities. But you'll always have that 12 or 13, 14% that say no. And it's just a level of acceptance that you can't please everybody all the time.
No, I think that's right.
Yeah.
So look, we're getting towards the end. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm just going to ask you one more question. 2 or 3 words, please. And I think Phil's already answered it, but he can answer it again if you like. In the new guidance, what's the one thing that you want to see either included or excluded? Who wants to start?
I'm happy to go there, Adrian. I think it's not necessarily something I want to see included or excluded. I want this to be not guidance. I want it to be a responsibility on all those with that statutory responsibility and duty to improve road safety. I want it to be directive. It has to be directive. Otherwise, we will not see consistency across a region like ours.
Okay, thank you. Andrew?
Yes, I'd agree with that. I think all of us in local government get very frustrated by how central government tells us what to do and how much money we have to do it and all that kind of thing. So yes, clear statements about priorities, what is important and what we should put first would help. Yes, so I absolutely agree with Darren.
Anybody want to add anything?
I don't know, perhaps whether it should be in the guidance or not, but the agenda needs to be broadened on the benefits of wide area schemes and the environmental health and community benefits of them, and also the economic benefits.
Right.
Yeah, I think that I'll just comment on that. I think that's right. I know that when I was working on the Wales project, there were people on the team who were very keen to emphasise, for example, the health benefits of reduced traffic noise. You know, it's something that's quite insidious, really. Now, as it turned out, we felt that it was important to keep it to the core message, because once you kind of diluted it, then it became more difficult to them. But I think that's right. I think within guidance, we can certainly make that point. There are so many benefits of slower speeds, and yet, you know, there is still pushback. I had a conversation with someone I went within government, I won't say who, the other day, who was saying, yeah, but what about the economic disbenefits? And you think, are you really serious that let's assume someone does get home 1 minute earlier and puts the kettle on 1 minute earlier? Is that really good for UK PLC? I just don't know. So, you know, it seems that the benefits do stack up, and that was what was so disappointing for me about the change in March 24. So many of the benefits that were even known in 2013 that were stated were removed from the guidance, and I think that was a real backward step. So I think putting that back in would be great.
Okay, Adam, I'm assuming you're going to agree with that. And
Yes.
because I need to sum up, and I've got 2 minutes to do it. So thank you all speakers. It's brilliant. I mean, I think if anybody watches that again, they'll see exactly how why and how you should implement 20 miles an hour. So I'm not going to summarize what you've already said, because people can do that for themselves. Just overall, look, we're seeing fantastic progress on 20 miles an hour around the UK. And as we've heard, there's loads of people who can, if you don't know how to do it, there's loads of people who can help you to do it. Look, we will hold another webinar on this in this series. I think we're going to wait a bit until we know a bit more about what the government's road safety strategy says in detail, and actually how the new speed limit guidance is setting up. Last word, if you haven't registered for the Vision Zero National Conference on the 30th of June 2026, you need to do so quickly, because actually the places are going pretty fast. Lastly, thank you very much to all speakers for all your time, and to all of you for attending. Until the next time, goodbye.